Hi, everyone. Welcome to the final day of the 2023 Waterton Glacier Science and History Week. It's our 20th year of the event. Can you believe it? Thank you so much for joining us to discover scientific research and conservation efforts in the Waterton Glacier International Peace Park. My name is Samara Hawkins. I'm an Internet Content and New Media Officer in Waterton Lakes National Park and your moderator for today's presentation, Archaeology in Paahtómahksikimi, hosted by Dylan Frank, the Cultural Resource Impact Assessment Officer here in Waterton Lakes National Park. Parks Canada acknowledges that Waterton Lakes is within present-day territory of Treaty 7, which includes traditional territory of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, Kainai, Piikani, and the Piikani nations, as well as the Tsuut'ina and Stoney Nakoda nations. The Ktunaxa Nation and Métis Nation Region 3 Association also consider Waterton Lakes as traditional territory. The lands and waters of Waterton Lakes have been used by millennia by Indigenous peoples for sustenance, ceremony, trade, and travel. We thank them for their continuous stewardship and for sharing the land with us. So time flies. This is our final day of the series. Today's webinar will run around 35 minutes, and we've allotted 5 to 10 minutes for questions at the end of Dylan's presentation. But now, a little bit more about Dylan. So Dylan Frank holds a bachelor's degree in archaeology and geography from the University of Lethbridge here in Alberta. He previously worked in Waterton Lakes as an archaeologist with the Post-Kenow Wildfire Project. In his current role as Cultural Resource Impact Assessment Officer, heck of a title, Dylan works to protect cultural resources and educate the public about archaeology in the park. From 10,000 years ago until today, Dylan is a member of the Kainai Nation, part of the Blackfoot Confederacy, whose traditional territory is where Waterton Lakes National Park is located, and working in this place is very special to him. A couple of items before we get started. This information will also go in the chat for you, but if you click the chat icon at the top of the screen to open the chat, you can type your questions there at any time during the presentation. Do be aware that your questions and comments will be visible to all the participants. You can also wait to ask your questions at the end of the presentation. We'll address as many questions as we can at that time. To improve your viewing experience, click the triple dot icon at the top of the window and select full screen to enlarge your main window. Use the focus on content option to hide presenters and other viewers. For live captioning, you can again click that triple dot icon and select turn on live captions from the drop-down menu. For now, I'll stop my rambling and I'll pass it off to Dylan.
Thanks, Samara. Oki, nisto nadanako, akawa misatu mistakists. Hello, everyone. My English name is Dylan Frank, and I just introduced myself with my Blackfoot name, which means climbs many mountains, and I'm also a member of the Kainai Nation here in Alberta. Currently, as Samara mentioned, I work as a Cultural Resource Impact Assessment Officer. I agree, it is a mouthful. And I work here in Waterton Lakes National Park. And previously, I started with Parks Canada, working as an archaeologist after the Kenow fire hit the park in 2017. So in case anyone in the audience isn't from Alberta or Canada, the place that I'm speaking from is in the farthest southwest corner of the province of Alberta. So if you look at the map, you can see in the very bottom left there's a little green dot. And as Samara mentioned during the land acknowledgement, Waterton falls within the boundaries of Treaty 7. So like it was mentioned earlier, I'm an archaeologist by trade. And as I just said, I'm also a member of the Blackfoot Confederacy. I grew up in a small town just to the east of the park called Cardston, so working here is pretty much like a dream. It doesn't even feel like work a lot of the times. My interest in archaeology first started when I was about 10 years old. My parents brought me out fishing one day, and on that trip, my mom lucked out and she found a beautiful spear point, like you can actually see there in that photo on the right.
Dylan,
Yep.
Your screen isn't sharing. And we would love to see the arrowheads. I'm sure they're very exciting. So
good catch. Sorry about that, everyone. I got too excited to share the archaeological information.
Wonderful. We can see it now.
So there we go. There's myself and my parents in the photo on the left and the projectile point that I just mentioned on the right there. So that is what we call an Alberta point, and we found out that it was about 9 to 10,000 years old. So as a 10-year-old, when you find out something's that old, it's pretty crazy. So after that amazing experience, I continued to be interested in old things. So after I finished high school, I enrolled in my first archaeology class at the University of Calgary. During this class, the professor brought us on a field trip to the site called Head Smashed in Buffalo Jump, which is also here in Alberta. And it's a place that I've been to many times before. But when you go there with an archaeologist who actually worked on the site themselves, it's a completely different experience, which was amazing from me and my colleagues. And when I got home from the trip that day, that was the moment that I actually did know that I wanted to be an archaeologist, and the rest is history from there. So one thing that I want to make clear from the very start of this presentation is archaeologists do not dig up dinosaurs. That's actually the job of other scientists called paleontologists. Archaeology is the study of human history through physical material left behind by people. These physical materials are what we call artifacts. So pretty much anything left behind by humans is of interest to me and my coworkers. And in Canada, anything made before the year 1950 is considered an artifact. I gotta quickly stop there and make sure I make it clear that it's anything made before the year 1950. So no, your grandparents are not artifacts. Physical evidence for the occupation of Paahtómahksikimi, or Waterton, begins around 10,000 years ago, when the glaciers were melting and the ice started to leave the area. Since new land was being exposed, new plants also started to grow on the landscape. The grassland ecosystem on the edge of the mountains in this particular area encouraged the influx of wildlife, which promoted a rich biodiversity in the area. Early peoples would have frequented the area as well to gather these newly grown plants and to hunt the animals that followed them. And all of their actions left behind physical evidence, which is still present on the landscape today. Occupation may have stretched back beyond 10,000 years, but we simply just do not have any physical materials that we can actually date that far back. So in a lot of the cases, we must rely on oral histories from elders and knowledge keepers to complete the rest of the story for us. Artifacts, or the physical evidence left behind by people, can be either pre-contact, which is before Europeans made it to the area, proto-contact, which is before European people made it to the area, but it's when their trade goods made it up the different trade routes, and post-contact, which is after European people were already settled in the area. Examples of pre-contact artifacts are items like arrowheads and stone tools. Proto-contact artifacts are items like metal arrowheads and tiny little glass beads used for trade. And post-contact artifacts are usually glass and metal items like bottles and old machinery, or as you can see in this picture on the right side of the slide, sardine cans can also be an artifact if it's made before the year 1950. So this brings us to August 30th of 2017. On that day, a very large thunderstorm had been hitting the mountains to the west of Waterton Lakes National Park, which, if you have been in the area much, it's actually pretty normal weather for the Rockies at that time of the year. But the thing that wasn't normal, however, was that it had been a very hot and dry summer, and it was an extremely windy day, and there had been several years without a fire in the park. And so a bolt of lightning struck down near the Keenau Mountain in British Columbia, which ignited a fire. And in just a couple days, the fire began spreading to the east because the wind had picked back up, and by September 11th, it spread into the park boundaries. So the photos on the slide right here just show some of the intensity of the fire and some views from Waterton itself. So if you've been here, you might recognize some of these places. In total, about 39% of the area of the park was burnt, and 285 of a known 366 archaeological sites were affected. As a result, Parks Canada initiated a 5-year archaeology program to assess the damages done to the cultural resources. In a lot of areas throughout the park, the topsoil and vegetation were completely removed from the fire, which provided a once-in-a-lifetime visibility of the ground and artifacts and the archaeological sites. However, it also caused the natural erosion processes to happen much faster because there were no plant roots holding anything together anymore. So if you look at the photos on the left and in the middle, you can see A lot of the trees were completely destroyed, and you can see the tree on the left side is actually already falling down. And that photo was taken pretty quick after the fire. So imagine what it looks like now with all the dead trees starting to fall. So because of the increased erosion, archaeological sites have been damaged and in some cases completely destroyed. And artifacts were also greatly affected. Rocks were completely shattered by the heat, as you can see on the picture on the right. Bone was burnt and completely mulched up in a lot of cases. If they were larger pieces of bone, sometimes they survived, but they were still pretty fragile. You can see a jawbone in the top middle there. Metal was melted and completely warped. That was pretty eye-opening because we didn't think it would get that hot, but it definitely did. And archaeological features such as old roads were exposed. So you can see in the bottom middle photo, there's a road stretching across the landscape. So in 2018, we were in a race to beat the plant regrowth to determine the damage done and the exposure to the sites. We found lots of new sites and we did very little digging because we were trying to beat the vegetation. In 2019, the focus was the opposite. We did lots of digging to try to understand the sites themselves and the landforms that the sites were on. And with this information, we were able to determine what was needed for long-term protection. We also tried to do some public outreach to get the messaging about archaeology out, and we did that through different blog posts, and there's a lot of media coverage as well that made it out there. In 2020, I'm sure everyone remembers this unfortunate year. That's when COVID-19 made field work impossible. So it was actually full of a lot of report writing for us archaeologists. But in some cases, it worked out because the fun part about archaeology is going out into the field and doing the fun work. When you go back to the lab and you have to do the report writing, it's not nearly as fun. So sometimes things get backlogged a bit. So in this case, we were able to catch up on all the things we needed to. In 2021, we were able to get back out into the field, and we also did some more outreach work at some different sites around the park. And in 2022, we focused more on the outreach and the training of park staff because the archaeology team only had 5 people, and it's a pretty large park. So the 5 of us can't cover everywhere in the park. So the value of training different park staff on what to do and what to look out for was very beneficial for all. And we also had volunteer days, and we engaged a lot with our local Indigenous communities. So as I just mentioned, our Indigenous communities were a very big focus. From the very beginning of the project, we've worked with many elders and knowledge keepers to have them guide how we actually tell the archaeological story here in Waterton Lakes National Park. And parks also made it a focus to hire Indigenous archaeologists, like myself, my colleague Kevin Blackplume, and my colleague Colleen Hughes. We've also created an Indigenous Archaeology Advisory Committee to create even more dialogue on how to share the work we've done. This committee is made up of elders and representatives from Kainai, Piikani, and Siksika, with each person being chosen by their nations themselves. We've hosted a few events with the committee throughout the summer so far, such as bringing them out onto the land to see exactly how we do our work, and also just giving them opportunities to see how archaeology in Parks Canada is done in general. We've done archaeological surveys for new sites, and we even managed to bring a group on a helicopter ride to the top of one of the mountains here in Waterton, because we have some very special types of archaeological sites here, and those are called Vision Quest sites. These locations get disturbed quite often by hikers and visitors that reach the summit. So a main focus of the committee is to start conversations on how the elders and knowledge keepers want to see these special places protected for the future. We've also brought a couple of youth groups out, and the group in this photo specifically is from the Piikani Nation. We've brought them out to do some different types of archaeological work, such as surveying and just presentations, getting them the basics of archaeology, trying to maybe eventually make one of them an archaeologist. That's always a goal for me if I can make it happen. That's awesome. And as you can see from the pictures here, they actually had a lot of fun. A story about the bottom right photo, those two were actually the quietest of the day until they picked up that artifact that they're holding right there. And you can see the smiles on their faces once they did that. Carly Greer Stewart is my colleague here in Waterton. She's a knowledge weaver for the park, and they are the ones that actively work with Pagani and also different nations to facilitate days like this. And they include different teams such as archaeology and fire and vegetation to provide opportunities for the youth to get some experience in these different fields. Other events that we've hosted include days with Kainai Recreation Department. We've hosted a couple of graduate classes from the University of Calgary, as well as a group from Siksika Family Services. So in Waterton, there's over 30 archaeological sites that are classified as being Vision Quest sites. These places are extremely important because Indigenous people would go to these locations to pray and fast with the purpose of gaining sacred knowledge. Uh, they're very important to protect because of the significant cultural value that they have. And even though they're often found on mountain ridges or peaks, they experience a lot of disturbances and damage from both people and animals. When people reach the summit of a mountain, they often build a small rock cairn as a way for them to leave their own mark, maybe as a trophy, or I'm not too sure the reason, but it's something a lot of hikers do. Unfortunately, this act can actually be very destructive because the rocks used for their cairns often come from actual ceremonial cairns or sites. So they're essentially destroying these locations. And by educating people of the presence of these types of ceremonial structures, respect and understanding can be developed to prevent future damage to protect these sites in the future. And as I mentioned, animals, such as bears, have also been known to knock over cairns. They actually do this while they're looking for insects underneath the rocks. So obviously they don't understand the significance, but it's still important for us to note that this does happen sometimes, and it's not always humans. So human impacts are far more disappointing to see at these sites. As I mentioned, a lot of the times people will make their own rock cairns, but other times they just take it up apart altogether. The top left-hand image shows a Vision Quest site consisting of an open circle and a rather large cairn structure beside it as it stood during our visit in 2021. Just 1 year later, in 2022, during our visit with the elders from Kainai, it was discovered that a significant number of stones had been removed from both the cairn and the circle itself to create a makeshift shelter, which was also littered with a bunch of cans and garbage, as you can see in these photos. These impacts and others, such as the recent vandalism of the stones on the summit of Bertha Mountain, as you can see in the bottom middle photo there, are typically the result of unknowledgeable and uninformed people. In talks with elders and community members from our Committee on Archaeology, we've discussed the best ways to protect these sites from further damage. The number one recurring theme was education. Members of the public that are recreating within the park must be better educated as the significance of the sites and how to properly interact with and respect these landscapes. Also discussed were ideas around signage, monitoring, potential area closures during modern site usage, and the enforcement of fines against those found to be impacting these living landscapes. Protection of both Vision Quest sites and pre-contact sites within the park. I missed a click right there. Protection of both Vision Quest sites and pre-contact sites within the park will be an ongoing and evolving priority for Waterton and other mountain parks in general. Co-development of ways to protect these locations with Indigenous partners will be a vital part of this process as we strive to find a balance between sharing these important locations and keeping them safe. So this brings us to the results of the project, primarily shown through artifacts. As previously mentioned, artifacts can be sorted into 3 general time periods: pre-contact, proto-contact, and post-contact. For the rest of this presentation, I'm going to mainly focus on a lot of the first 2 periods, but I'll still touch on the post-contact. So overall, during the field seasons that we had after the Kenai wildfire, we were able to identify over 80 new archaeological sites. We found 85 or more bison skulls, and I'll touch on those in just a moment. We've found 23 different rock material types in the park. We've visited well over 350 of our sites. We've found around 100 projectile points, and I'll also touch on those shortly. And overall, we've collected 20,000 or more artifacts. That's a pretty high number for just a couple of years. So before I move to the next slide, I just want to make it clear that they were not all projectile points and cool artifacts, as some people might think. A very large number of this 20,000 was actually the little tiny flakes. And every single flake of a rock that comes off when you're making a tool is classified as its own artifact. So if you think about how many tiny little flakes would come off when you're just scraping a rock against each other, it makes sense as to why the number got so high. And I got to admit, I had a little bit of fun collecting as many flakes as I could in my first year. So quickly before I talk more about the artifacts, I want to give a quick definition. When I say lithic, I'm really just referring to rocks. Archaeologists have a lot of fancy words to try to make ourselves feel smarter, but lithic means rock. And while some tools are made from bone, these often break down since they're organic material. So we're never going to find an actual bone tool. Most of the times, if we are talking about bone tools, that information is provided to us from our elders and our knowledge keepers. And this map that we have here on the screen, it shows where some of the different lithic material types that we found here in the park are actually sourced to. So if you look closely, I have an arrow pointing towards that small little red polygon in the middle. That's Waterton, and it's a pretty small little polygon compared to, say, that green polygon to the north of it, which is Banff, or the one to the south, which is yellow, and that is Yellowstone. So for our tiny little location, the range of lithic materials that we have here is pretty significant. And you can see some stretch as far as Yellowstone or Bear Gulch, Idaho to the west of Yellowstone, or even into the far south ranges of South Dakota. Each of these different rock materials would have had to be accessed by someone. So either someone made the journey all the way from Waterton, or the most likely conclusion is that these different materials were traded amongst people. And when we start to paint this picture, it unravels a story of how people transported items such long distances. And if you think about the mountain passes that Waterton is essentially in, those were pretty much highway systems for people back in the day. Just like animals, people would have taken the path of least resistance on their journeys, which would have really increased their chances of encountering other groups of people. And once they did that, they would have made some trades. So these photos here show some examples of lithic tools. While they're all pretty cool things to see, we're actually only able to tell how old the projectile points are. So the ones on the left side of the left photo are the projectile points. And this is because so many of these projectile points have been found in the region that we're in currently, which is the Great Plains, and they've been found beside other materials that we can date, such as bone. And from this, archaeologists have been able to make a timeline to accurately show how old each type of projectile point is. Currently, we know of about 10 sites in the park that have projectile points that are around 7,000 years or older. So just for comparison, the Egyptian pyramids were only made about 4,000 years ago. So if you double that number, and in some cases add a couple thousand more years, that's when you're getting into the range of the history of Waterton and the people that were here. Other tools that you can see in this photo are things called mauls or hammerstones. That's in the photo just to the right of the projectile points. Those were used as essentially a hammer to break down materials or break open bone if you're trying to get the marrow inside. Or you can even just grind up meat and berries for making pemmican. And a cool thing about that kind of tool is that one of our elders that we work with told my colleague that they're actually a generational tool that was passed down from mother to daughter. So if you think about it, a very hard material made out of granite would take a long time to make that groove through the middle. So if you're able to take that work away from your daughter, it just makes sense. Other tools are bifaces, like you can see in the third photo. Again, biface is a fancy word that archaeologists use. It's essentially just meaning knife. And then there's scrapers, and scrapers are used to process different parts of the animal once you actually make the kill. So this picture shows the range of projectile points that have been found here in Waterton. The largest would have been the spear points, and they're generally the oldest. We then see a transition to dart points for atlatls, and finally, smaller points typically associated with the bow and arrow. So it's a common misconception. Most people see projectile points and they call the whole thing arrowheads, but arrowheads are actually the small ones that still did the same amount of damage, but they just were such a better technology. So technology, as you can see here on the left, there's a guy holding a spear. That technology was successful and it lasted for a few thousand years, but it did require a lot of skill. And if you missed your spear throw, that could have been the end of the hunt for the day. So while it worked, maybe it wasn't the most efficient. And the middle photo is what we call an atlatl or dart points. An atlatl is essentially just adding a lever to the spear. So if anyone in this presentation has ever thrown a ball for their dog with a chuck it, it's essentially the same thing. It's just a launcher that makes the projectile go much farther and faster. And the projectile points didn't need to be nearly as large because with the increased velocity, they did the same amount of damage, or in a lot of cases, even more. So it made sense to phase out from the spear technology. And again, once the bow and arrow made it into the area, it made sense to phase out from the previous technology because the size of the arrow was much, much smaller, again, because of the increased velocity and mechanical force. It made hunting much more efficient and you could reload pretty easily while you were shooting. So if you had the choice between a bow and a spear, I think that'd be an easy decision to make. Here's a few examples of some of the oldest projectile points that we've found since I started on the project. So we have on the left there a Scottsbluff spear point. You can actually see there's a smaller piece that's closer to the bottom. That's the only part that we found of the point, but again, with our very large collections of projectile points, we can hold it up and, in this case, put it up against other examples of Scottsbluff points, and we can accurately make the determination that that's actually what it is. And we have a lot of oxbow dart points, so that goes back to the atlatl technology, and same with the McKean and the Pelican Lake dart points. So this projectile point is what we call our most unique lithic of the project. Most points actually have a point to it, but this one obviously doesn't. It has a rounded tip. The base is similar to that of a McKean dart point that you might have noticed on a previous slide, but we're still very unsure of the function of this. Some elders have offered some suggestions, such as it was modified to be used as a pendant, so maybe a necklace, or a representation of a bison hide, or maybe even multi-tool. It could have been the first Swiss Army knife. Who knows? If anyone has any ideas, feel free to put it in the chat, or if you want to save your comment for when we get to the question period, you can do that as well. Some more examples of projectile points that were found over the project. The cool story about the one in the top left is that it was actually found by a fisherman while he was just out on the river one day. He looked down and sitting on the riverbank was this projectile point. And lucky for us, he had actually heard of what the work that we'd been doing. So he contacted the park and he made sure that he gave it over to us, which is what we want because that site itself actually didn't have any dates tied to it. So him bringing that to us was really good because we were able to tie a few thousand years old or a few thousand-year-old date from that point to that site itself. So even the public can help us in our efforts. And it's very, very cool to see when people do the right thing. Other types of lithic tools include bifaces, like I mentioned, fancy word for knife. Another tool is a wedge that was essentially used to crack open bone or wood. So when you're chopping it up, maybe there'd be a pretty solid piece that you'd need a wedge for. There's shaft straighteners, which you can see in the top right. That essentially had a little groove on one side that was very smooth and straight. So you could rub your arrow shaft or your spear shaft through that, and it would get all the deformities out, and it would make it so the spear or arrow would actually fly straight, which is what you would want when you're hunting. The bottom left two pictures are more scrapers. They come in all different shapes and sizes. And it makes sense because when you first kill an animal, you'll want a big scraper for the bulk of the work. But when you get to the fine areas of the hide, you don't want to destroy it. So you'd use a much smaller or a finger scraper. And then there's, of course, drills in the bottom right. That one, unfortunately, is broken. They do have pretty small tips, so a lot of the time we find them broken like that. But each of these different tool types do tell us different stories of what went on at a specific site. Even though it doesn't provide us a date, it still gives us really good information. So for example, if there's a lot of scrapers found at a site compared to shaft straighteners, the site was most likely used to process food rather than for tool production. Artifacts from the proto-contact era are rarely found in the Waterton archaeological records. These were the years of first contact between indigenous groups and the early white traders and explorers. Some of the proto-contact items, as seen on the slide, have been found in the Red Rock Valley. So the top left photo is a metal triangular adornment item. We kind of think it's more of an actual jingle, but just with the thin metal and nature burying it, it essentially just flattened it out. The bottom left photo are some glass beads. Those beads, as you can see beside the scale bar, are very, very tiny little things. So they didn't really have a whole lot, like much of a function, but they were attractive items that were used in trade. And of course, on the very far right, there's a metal trade point. Again, it was not the thickest metal, so if you used it to hunt, it would have likely just broken. So a lot of the times it was just a decorative item as well. Another term that we use in archaeology to describe things is the word feature. These are the things that you can't take with you when you leave camp, like a fire pit or a building wall. These were pretty easy to spot after the fire since some of them were pretty big. These photos show a couple of examples of features, such as a historic midden in the bottom left. In the top middle photo, there's a fire pit that I'm taking a soil sample from. I think that might have been my first day on the job, so you can see how happy I was for that. And also rock cairns, like the ones used in drive lanes, and also wagon trails are classified as features. While artifacts that have been exposed by the wildfire and the subsequent erosion can be collected to ensure they're not lost or worse, looted, features remain a part of the landscape and must be protected in place. So they're a different type of archaeology, but a very important part as well. So one example of a prominent feature here in Waterton is the bison drive lane system. It's found in the Escarine, so if you've been to the park, it's directly west of the park gates. And these drive lanes were long, steep, snake-like hills that often had a rock pile or cairn on the top, or in some cases, even a person to act as a barrier to the animals that were being run through there. Most of the time, it would have been bison. And when the bison started running, they would take the path of least resistance, which was usually right into a trap set by the people. Sometimes there would be a cliff at the end of the lanes, like at Head Smash and Buffalo Jump, so animals would fall to their death, and other times they would run straight into a pool of water, where they couldn't get away from the people waiting on the other side. These pictures show an overhead view of the parts of the drive lanes, highlighted in red, as well as examples of different rock piles or cairns that were found in this feature. Historical artifacts are also found everywhere in Waterton because of the exploration of white settlers in the early 1900s. The first oil well in Western Canada was established here, so lots and lots of exploring had to be done to find the best places to drill. A man named William Aldridge and his family arrived in the park in 1897, and after meeting and getting directed by Kootenai Brown, they found oil seeps in Akamina Pass. By 1898, they were collecting and selling this oil to local farmers. As a result of this work, tons of metal and glass objects are found throughout the passes, with these photos showing a couple of examples of these historical artifacts. The first photo shows a post hole from a fence post that was placed in the area, so someone was trying to make a little homestead of some sort. The second photo shows an abandoned drill pipe that was used to test oil seeps. The third photo shows a natural oil seep pool, which to this day is actually still there. And there's a lot of stories of animals using the pool itself or the oily mud to prevent insects from bothering them. And the final photo there shows the gravestone of William Aldridge's son, Alexander Aldridge, born July 1902 and died August of 1902. Very sad, but that just shows that it was an incredibly tough place to live in at that time. Here's some more photos showing historical buildings and features. The photos on the left show an old dynamite shack that not a lot of people in the park actually knew about until the fire came through, but luckily there was no dynamite in there. It was just a building. And on the right, in the right photos, there, sorry, the top right photo is a photo of another trail system weaving through Waterton. And there's tons of those from both the pre-contact and post-contact time periods. And the bottom right photo shows the foundation of an old house. A little bit hard to see, but there is a 90-degree turn that is there. And when you're in person, it's much easier to spot out. But it shows, again, people were trying to live in Yakima Pass where it was pretty difficult to survive. The first photo here shows an old metal bed frame that was left behind. So you're not going to bring the heavy stuff out with you when you finish your trip up into the mountains, of course, or at least back then you didn't. Now we have a lot of different rules. The photo in the top middle is actually tobacco tags from an old tobacco tin. Below that is a can or a pile of cans, which we call a can midden. And the photo on the right is a large metal gear from oil drilling equipment that again was left behind once the equipment broke. And household goods were also left behind, such as old pots and pans, utensils, cups, knives, and even ice skates. Items like this show that the people who came to the area brought their entire families with them. Women and children played their parts in the early development years of Waterton. And that's unfortunately an aspect that doesn't get talked about a whole lot in archaeology is the rest of the family. A lot of the time it just focuses on the men and the work that they did. So sharing the stories of the woman and the children is extremely important for us here in Waterton as well. And tons and tons and tons of glass bottles have been found. These pictures show that there were lots of different kinds that made their way to Waterton. The most common brand was the Fritz Six Bottling Company, which actually came from the nearby Lethbridge, Alberta. During these days, the idea of leave no trace was not around yet. So rather than hauling the heavy stuff out, like I just mentioned, people actually just threw them into the bushes thinking no one would ever see them again. But after the fire came and burnt all the bushes away, we can see everything, unfortunately. And other glass and ceramic items like mugs, plates, whiskey bottles, and power line insulators have also been found here after the fire. So if you do travel through the park, there's always a chance that you're going to come across an artifact. Knowing what to do if you find something is key for both Waterton and I'm sure Glacier shares the same feelings towards artifacts. I actually know a lot of the archaeologists from there and they have the same feelings. The main thing to do is do not move the artifact, as this can actually destroy vital context connecting the artifact to the landscape. And trained archaeologists know what to look for, so that's why we ask people to leave things in place so the archaeologist can return there and start painting the picture with the knowledge that they have. And if you can, try to record a few bits of information such as the date, your name. If you can get the coordinates of the location, that is awesome. A lot of smartphones actually take coordinates when you just take a picture, so just taking pictures is very helpful for us. And then, of course, report the find to the visitor center, and they'll get in contact with myself or the Glacier Park archaeologist to move forward from there. So thank you for tuning in today to learn about archaeology in one of the most special places in the world. Now, I guess it's time for questions. Oh, really quickly, I have my email on the screen there. So if anyone has any questions that they're not comfortable asking in the chat or on the screen, feel free to just shoot me an email. I don't mind at all. Oh, you're muted, Samara.
I am muted. Thank you. Um, thank you so much for the presentation. It was wonderful. So folks, if you have questions, now's the time. You can type them in the chat, or if you want to use the hand raise icon, we can unmute you and you can ask your questions with your voice. All right, let's go to the chat. So Rocket has a question here. Has there been any ceremonial points found in the park? If so, are there any stories that are attached to them?
That is a great question. Typically, we don't classify points as being ceremonial points. I guess the only time they would be is if they were actually found in a ceremonial context. So maybe buried underneath the Vision Quest site or at a different ceremonial site. But that being said, if we know it's a ceremonial site, we do not want to do any sort of intrusive work there because that essentially will destroy the structure. So unfortunately, and I guess, which is, it's good that we haven't found any ceremonial points here. There any other questions that anyone has?
Oh, we have a couple more come in. Marlene asks, what is the oldest artifact you have found so far?
The oldest artifact that I have found, I believe it's about 10,000 years old, but that's a funny one because it's supposed to be a spear point, but it's actually just about the size of a thumbnail. So I need to do a little more research to verify if it's actually about that age, but in my mind, I have a 10,000-year-old point that I've found. And if you remember from the start, my mom found a 9,000-year-old point, so I'm kind of winning.
Barbara asks, or she says, I'm aware that Dr. Barney Reeves has discovered at least one buffalo jump in Waterton. Are there others?
I know the one that you're referencing to. There is no others that we've been able to identify so far. The driveline system that we have, it's very large, and on the south end of it is the river system that Barney identified his buffalo jump at, and on the north end is a bunch of glacial ponds. So that's why I mentioned the idea of running the bison into the ponds to be able to kill them because there's no cliffs over there. And the actual buffalo jump that Barney was able to identify, unfortunately, after the fire, with all the erosion going on, it's actually washed out now. So the entire bone bed that Barney encountered is all down in the river now. So it's unfortunate, but that's just natural processes taking their toll.
Oh, that is awful. Jane asks, can you tell where the beads came from?
I have heard from my colleague. I'm unfortunately not a bead specialist, but my colleague Jennifer Ailes, she did a little bit of research and she believes those specific beads that we found were from Russia. So quite a ways. I'm not too sure the exact story of how they got here, but I'm sure a historian could help me out in that side.
So we have a question from Mark. Were you able to date the bison skulls you found? And if so, how old are they?
Unfortunately, we were not able to date any of the bones that we found because uh, actually getting a carbon date off of them requires the bone to be not destroyed or burnt. And in our case, everything was completely burnt. So we could have sent them off, but the dates would have come back not accurate at all, and it would have essentially been a waste of money on our end.
Brent asks, how many sites were damaged or destroyed by large-scale post-fire erosion events?
I don't think there was many actually destroyed. There might have been a handful along rivers, but our team was actually able to go and assess and mitigate any losses before site destruction actually occurred. So I can't speak specifically on a number, but I know it wasn't a lot that were actually destroyed, which is good.
Any last questions there? Oh, let's see. So Heather Davis says, this has been incredible to learn about. I find things often outside of a national park. Do you have any advice for who to contact outside Waterton, i.e. a castle or the Crow's Nest Pass?
That is a great question. I do know. I don't have the specific email right offhand, but if you just type in Alberta Archaeology or Alberta Culture and Heritage, they do have a very well put together website that lays out the steps of what to do if you do encounter something. And a lot of the times there's different organizations throughout the province called the Alberta Archaeological Association, and they host different events in Medicine Hat, Lethbridge, Calgary, Red Deer, and Edmonton. And they do different educational events or even just I think they call it Stones and Bones, where you can bring any artifacts that you may have found yourself and you can bring it and have a trained archaeologist identify it and record it. So there's lots and lots of resources throughout the province and throughout Canada in general.
Racket asks, has there been any sites discovered showing evidence of human conflict?
Human conflict would be it'd be a difficult thing to show in the archaeological record. I feel like there would have to be maybe bones of humans found near there, which we haven't found any in the park itself. One theory on that is because the soil here is actually pretty acidic, so organics sitting in the soil don't last very long. But as for evidence showing human conflict, I can't specifically say we have any.
Right, I guess we'll wrap it up here. So we're going to close the session in a few short minutes. So if you want to squeak in a question or two, I think we could make some time. But thank you so much to everyone for joining us this week, especially Dylan for his presentation today and our incredible team behind the scenes. Be sure to keep an eye on both Waterton Lakes National Park and Glacier National Park's websites and social media channels for its information about next year's event. Please share your comments or additional questions on this presentation with us at Dylan's email, as he had listed on the last slide, or at crownrlc@nps.gov. Thank you so much and have a wonderful Friday.
Thanks, everyone.